The courtroom was still, an electric tension hanging in the air, as if the very walls were holding their breath. It was a simple day, at least on the surface, with nothing more than another case being heard, another drama to unfold in the annals of justice. But deep inside, it was clear that this day was different. This day had a charge of its own, a moment that would leave an indelible mark in history. The crowd, a mix of spectators and legal observers, shifted slightly in their seats, their eyes darting between the defense and the prosecutor. But it was the man sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table that commanded the most attention. General Marcus Williams. His posture was perfect as always. He was tall and broad, with the stoic bearing of a man who had spent years in the military. His deep-set eyes seemed to carry the weight of the world, and his uniform, though pristine, bore the memories of battles fought and won, not just on the fields of war, but in the ongoing fight for respect and justice. His resume was more than just a list of accomplishments. It was the story of a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, pushing through the most impossible circumstances, all in the name of honor. But here, today, he wasn't the general. He was simply another man in a courtroom, fighting for something far more elusive than a victory on the battlefield: dignity. The trial had been going on for weeks, but now it had reached a boiling point. At the defendant's table, Officer Gerald Simmons sat slouched, wearing a smirk that suggested he had nothing to fear. The case against him was serious. Charged with racially charged misconduct during a routine traffic stop, accusations of using his badge to intimidate and humiliate an innocent citizen. Yet Simmons, who had spent his career as a lawman, seemed entirely unfazed by the gravity of the accusations. He had all the confidence of someone who believed they were untouchable. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor laid out the details of the case, but every now and then Simmons would mutter something under his breath, his voice dripping with sarcasm, mocking not only the prosecutor but anyone who dared speak against him. But his eyes, as they flickered to General Williams, seemed to sharpen his expression one of arrogance. It was in that moment that the mocking began. Simmons leaned forward in his chair, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's a man like him doing in a place like this?" He gestured towards General Williams, who remained unmoved, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "What's next? A sergeant major with a diploma?" A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, but it wasn't just a laugh, it was a laugh that cut to the bone, a laugh that carried all the venom of years of racial prejudice and disrespect. General Williams, for a brief moment, looked as though the world had stopped. The walls of the courtroom seemed to close in on him, and he felt his heartbeat accelerate, the familiar anger rising like an old, unwelcome friend. But unlike many, he had learned long ago how to control his emotions. He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. He knew what was happening here, and he understood it. This wasn't just about a police officer abusing his power. This was about the deep-seated disrespect that had followed him his whole life, the kind of mockery that had plagued his very existence since childhood. For years, he had fought battles that no one could imagine. He had been to the front lines, had seen comrades fall, and had endured the bitterness of war. He had earned his place in history, not by the medals on his chest, but by the resilience of his spirit. He knew that disrespect was often the weapon of choice for those who feared the strength of others, and yet here it was again, being wielded against him. The laughter continued for a moment, but then, like a spark to dry tinder, something inside General Williams snapped. He slowly rose from his chair, his movement deliberate and measured, and the room fell into an unnatural silence. His tall frame towered over the courtroom, his presence commanding attention without a single word spoken. He had faced down danger from enemies who wanted to kill him, but this was different. This was personal. His voice broke the silence, calm but thunderous. "I don't know what kind of jokes you think you're making, Officer Simmons," he began, each word carrying the weight of 1,000 lifetimes of service, sacrifice, and unshakable resolve. "But let me tell you this, your kind of joke has a cost. It costs people like me, and it costs people like you. You mock me for my service, but you've never stood where I've stood, faced what I've faced, or done what I've done. His gaze locked onto Simmons, who was now visibly uncomfortable, his cocky grin faltering as he realized the gravity of the situation. Now, take a moment to think about that while I make a call that will change everything. For a split second, it seemed as if time itself had frozen. The murmur of the crowd quieted to a faint hum, the rustling of papers and shifting in seats almost imperceptible. The courtroom felt smaller now, tighter, as if the words spoken by General Williams had sealed the fate of everything that was about to happen. Simmons, his arrogance quickly melting away, opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The general's calm demeanor, in stark contrast to the fire that burned in his eyes, sent an icy chill down the spine of everyone present. What did he mean? What was this call that would change everything? Without waiting for an answer, General Williams reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It wasn't an extravagant gesture. In fact, it was simple, almost ordinary. But the effect it had on the room was profound. Everyone watched as he dialed, his fingers moving swiftly, the weight of his next move pressing down on the atmosphere like a storm on the horizon. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft hum of his phone ringing. And as the courtroom held its collective breath, it was clear whatever happened next would not only determine the fate of Officer Simmons, but it would change everything for General Williams as well. The call was made, and from this moment on, no one would be laughing anymore. The tension in the air was palpable, thickening with each passing second. The smirk that had once adorned Officer Simmons' face was gone now, replaced by a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. The stage had been set for a confrontation that none of them had seen coming. General Williams had made his move, and now the only thing left was for the world to watch as the wheels of justice began to turn in ways they had never imagined. The courtroom remained frozen as General Williams stepped back from the podium. It was a moment suspended in time, where every second seemed to stretch on infinitely. The tension was palpable, every person in the room feeling the electric charge in the air. No one knew what would happen next. They only knew that something monumental was unfolding, something that would forever alter the course of this trial and the fates of those involved. As General Williams returned to his place at the front of the room, there was no trace of hesitation in his demeanor. His tall figure remained steady, unflinching under the weight of the situation. The power was now in his hands, and there was no turning back. He had made the call, a call that no one expected, and now he was ready to deliver the verdict that no one had foreseen. The spectators, already captivated, leaned forward, sensing that history was about to be made before their very eyes. I called someone who knows exactly what it feels like to serve this country, General Williams said, his voice calm but filled with authority. It rang out clearly, and the words seemed to hang in the air, powerful and unwavering. I called someone who understands the pain of ridicule, oppression, and disdain. And I called someone who is in a position to change the course of this case, someone whose intervention you will regret, Officer Simmons. The words had barely left his lips when the doors to the courtroom swung open with a suddenness that seemed to break the very silence that had enveloped them. The crowd turned as one, their collective gaze fixed on the figure who had just entered. And then, as if on cue, the murmurs grew louder. It was General David Westbrook, a man whose name carried weight in military and political circles. Westbrook was a towering figure, respected not only for his military accomplishments but for his outspoken efforts toward racial equality within the armed forces. His presence alone sent a wave of energy through the room, but what truly commanded attention was the fact that he wasn't alone. Two high-ranking officials from the Department of Justice stood behind him, their expressions grave but resolute. They were known for their unyielding stance on police misconduct, and their presence signaled something far greater than a mere courtroom battle. Westbrook's voice broke the tension, smooth but firm. "Gentlemen," he began, his gaze sweeping across the room, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding here. Officer Simmons, you may think you're a joker, but I assure you the only one laughing now is your career." Simmons, who had been leaning back smugly in his chair, suddenly looked anything but confident. His face drained of color as the realization of what was unfolding began to sink in. General Westbrook continued, his tone unwavering. This trial is no longer just about the charges against you. It's about something far bigger. It's about accountability, and the truth is, Officer Simmons, you are not going to walk out of here with your badge intact. The air in the courtroom grew thick with anticipation as Simmons shifted uneasily in his seat. What is this? What is happening? He stammered, his arrogance slipping away. Oh, it is, General Williams replied, his voice gaining strength with each word. But it's also a place where justice must prevail. I made a call to the highest authority that can address the failures of officers like you. You will not leave this courtroom the same way you came in. The Department of Justice is already on its way to ensure that you will face the full weight of the law. The words struck Simmons like a bolt of lightning, his bravado completely evaporating. He stood up quickly, his face now a mask of panic, but it was too late. The wheels of justice had already begun to turn, and there was no stopping them. The judge, trying to regain control of the situation, banged his gavel and demanded, "Order! Order in the court!" But it was clear that the moment had passed. The power had shifted. General Williams stood firm, resolute, and unwavering in his pursuit of justice. Officer Simmons, once untouchable in his arrogance, was now a mere shell of his former self, powerless in the face of the truth. As the Department of Justice officials moved toward Simmons, they gestured for him to stand. He didn't resist, but his hands trembled as he was escorted from the courtroom. The whispers and murmurs from the crowd grew louder. But they weren't whispers of disbelief or confusion anymore. They were whispers of admiration and awe for the man who had made it all happen. General Williams turned toward the crowd, his eyes scanning the room. "I've faced far worse than what this man could throw at me," he said, his voice strong and clear. "But the difference between me and him is simple. I fight for the right cause. And today I called upon the truth. And the truth has won." There was a collective release of tension as the room filled with a quiet but powerful applause. The moment was not just a victory for General Williams, but for every person who had ever been the target of racial discrimination, for every voice that had been silenced by mockery or hate. The victory was symbolic, a reminder that no one, regardless of their position, could escape accountability when they misused their power. Simmons, now in the custody of the DOJ agents, was led out of the courtroom, his head lowered in shame. The reality of what had just transpired hit him in full force. The very man he had mocked, the man he thought he could belittle with his derisive words, had just called upon the full power of justice, and it had come crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Outside the courthouse, reporters began to swarm, eager to cover the aftermath of the day's unprecedented events. General Williams, however, remained calm. He had done what needed to be done. He had stood firm in the face of adversity, and he had made sure that justice prevailed. This trial, this moment, would go down in history as a turning point, not just for Officer Simmons, but for the entire system that allowed such mockery to go unchallenged. As the day came to a close, General Williams stood alone for a moment, looking out over the now empty courtroom. His fight was not over. There were still battles to be won, injustices to be addressed, but today had been a victory, a hard-fought victory, one that would echo for generations to come. And as he walked out of the courtroom, flanked by his colleagues and the Department of Justice officials, he knew this was only the beginning. This was the first step toward something greater, something more powerful than any courtroom drama. It was a movement toward true equality, accountability, and justice for all. As General Williams walked out of the courtroom, the echoes of his victory reverberated through the halls, a symbol of justice and courage in the face of adversity. This story isn't just about one man's triumph. It's a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. If you believe in the power of truth and the courage to fight for justice, make sure to follow Expect Stories. We bring you gripping tales of resilience, strength, and the human spirit, where every victory counts and every voice deserves to be heard. Subscribe to expect stories for more powerful narratives that inspire change and ignite action. Don't miss out on the stories that need to be told, the stories that can make a difference.